This is Jessie Czebotar with Kingdom Living with Jessie and another special report. This one about Ted Turner, some extraterrestrial information, and we're also going to get into the United Nations Foundation. Let me go to a screen share here. So you can find more of my series, Unveiling the System, on my website, kingdomlivingwithjessie.com. You'll also find my affidavits and other information on timothycharleshomeseth.com. And let me go to a new screen here. Sorry, it takes just a few minutes to change these up. So we'll call this report extraterrestrial warfare. And today I saw a special report on the Pentagon Pedophile Task Force War Correspondence titled Thousands Upon Thousands of Kids Buried in the Backyard at Montauk by the U.S. Military, Your Taxes, on timothycharleshomeseth.com. That is really worth looking into. And I encourage you also to go to Operation Live to Tell if you appreciate the war reports and war correspondence of Timothy Charles Homeseth. So today we're going to start by talking about Ted Turner and Jane Fonda. He is part of the Luciferian Brotherhood, as is she. He also is connected to your sovereign military order. We're going to get into further connections with Ted Turner and upper level elites within the system. That's going to include grand high priestesses as well as councilmen in the Luciferian Brotherhood, as well as working with and overseeing sovereign military order. I experienced Ted Turner and Jane Fonda at Brotherhood events, ceremonies, and rituals, and human hunting parties. Jane Fonda, we see right here, is connected to Joan Collins. She's the Grand High Priestess, one of the Grand High Priestesses over the Western quadrants. Jane Fonda is one of those who's underneath and studied under Joan Collins. Ted Turner, let's talk about Ted Turner and his love for hunting humans. Dick Cheney was one of his hunting buddies, and some of their human hunting locations included the Old Faithful Inn in Yellowstone National Park, that whole area. I've extensively talked about the Yellowstone area in both my Congress petition as well as I have affidavits on Casper, Wyoming, and on Yellowstone, and talk about Dick Cheney in particular in those and the areas that they would do their hunting parties in. I've identified some specific areas that I think you'll find cross connections to Ted Turner in. I've also talked about in those documents the connection between the Yellowstone area. You also have the Trenton area, the Trident Falls area in Yellowstone, which we'll get to in a minute. But all of that being connected to a few areas in West Yellowstone, Montana, including Lamar Buffalo Ranch. And there's the symbol there that they will use connected to some of the Pentacles of Solomon. You also have the White Buffalo Hotel that is there in West Yellowstone, Montana. And, these are areas, both the Yellowstone Old Faithful Inn as well as the White Buffalo Hotel, when they have these massive hunting parties, They will have the older, the retiring elite, the high priests and priestesses who can't go hunting anymore, will be staying at the resorts or looking like they're taking a vacation. And while others are out, they will be hunting inside the inns or the lodges for the younger children, some of them even younger than 1 years old. So they will, you'll have these older elite that will be hunting within the lodges themselves for these younger children. Most of that they're not going to kill, they will just hunt and rape and engage in sex with them. I have here a map too with the Trenton Falls area, which is one of the areas that I've identified, where they have certain bioweapons and a Poseidon missile, but those areas are all interconnected. You also have Ted Turner being connected to the Vermeo, his resort or reserve, they call it, in the Chihuahuan desert. And you can see how extensive that desert. And when you think of this, don't just think desert, think underground. You have areas that are going to connect into New Mexico, Arizona, Mexico, as well as a big chunk of Texas. You also have many of, I would say the majority of national parks are going to be formerly under UNESCO, um, and, considered UNESCO lands within the system. That's kind of who's funding those and who's the financial backers. And that should be a concern to all of us because UNESCO is one of the branches receiving funds in order to buy up territories or lands that then are considered sovereign within our own country. So, the national parks, when you go there, they're considered sovereign territories. They have their own courts. They also have their own law enforcement, which is going to be run by the sovereign military. I have decoded their national park symbol, which is the arrowhead. And in that arrowhead, you see the mountains, you see the tree. I've shown how that goes back to certain brotherhood orders that are going to be in charge of overseeing that territory, which falls under a crest. So it's considered a quadrant territory, quadrant rule in the system. You'll have the Order of Odin, as well as the Order of the Cedars of the Tall Trees, also known as the Foresters over that area. You'll also have the Order of the White Buffalo, all of that being under the jurisdiction of the Golden Dawn. That also, that's seen in the symbol, but then, you know, because they're a quadrant territory, who else is overseeing them in the system? You're going to have that land classified, as sovereign territory, and it'll be under the control of the United Nations. So I cover some of these interconnecting pieces in my series, The Council of the System, in Unveiling the System series. These are This is the website where you can find it, kingdomlivingwithjessie.com under Unveiling. And then these are the 5 main videos where I begin to break all that down, how the council's working, how it's connected to the United Nations, how they are taking over lands and territories. You'll see that in the Princes of Jerusalem Part 1, the Princes of Jerusalem Part 2, the councils and constitutions, the structure of the councils, and then the special report I did on UNESCO, the heritage sites, and crimes against children. This is a blog that you can find by Jane Fonda titled Ted Turner and Prairie Dogs. In this was written August 22nd, 2013. And I want to read some of this just to kind of show you how these individuals work and operate. in this, Jane Fonda is going to bring out a lot of Ted's love for hunting. But really, these are terms, the things that they're talking about, the pictures that they're using, are a way that they traffic children or speak of the hunting parties openly and in the public and in our face. Prairie dogs being an early term for child pornography, including those, usually it was used with those that would be considered infants or toddlers, or the children that were underground and periodically would be allowed up above ground. I've spoken about some of the areas, one of those being the Black Forest Lodge of the Rothschilds. And that lodge area, which we'll get into in a minute here, being one of the places where in their woods they have underground caverns and caves that they have cages in. And they'll keep children in that cage until it's time for the hunting parties. Then they'll release the kids into the woods. And, really it's a fight for those children for life. They're running, um, trying to save their lives, and these individuals are hunting and tracking them down. So Jane Fonda says, there's a lot that Ted Turner taught me during the decade we were married, and during the more than a decade that we've been unmarried but close friends. But one of my most favorite things I learned from him was to love prairie dogs. Please don't stop reading now that you know that I'm writing about prairie dogs and not some tasty gossip about my favorite ex-husband. Please don't. Please stay with me, even if you're a cattle rancher or a rancher's wife, someone who loves things for target practice. Now, I'm going to stop there, but I encourage you to go back and read this, look at pictures. Um, this is how the elite openly communicate in their coded language certain things that they're talking about. Those certain things, including human hunting parties. So, one of the other places, where the human hunting parties were located was at the Rothschilds Black Forest Hunting Lodge. I have some pictures there of the territories. And we have an interesting article about some shenanigans between Rupert Murdoch and Ted Turner, but there's a lot of back story with that is going to begin to interconnect not only between Murdoch and Ted Turner, but you're also going to find connections between those same individuals, Dick Cheney and Jacob Rothschilds. Um, all of these men being sitting in circle groups in the Luciferian Brotherhood system together. Um, One of the other places where I encountered them, it was in connection with Alton Towers and Staffordshire, and specifically Swynnerton and Thorpe Arch, which is going to be connected to the Stafford, there in Staffordshire. You have a massive underground, um, you know, kind of it looks like a military um, um, ammo's building, but let me go to another screen share here. And let's look at this because, what we're talking about is you have in that facility, they make it look like it's just a training center, but really it is so much more that we're going to get into. And you have gunpowder magazine areas. This is what the above ground is, and I want to get to some of these sites in the United States, but these are, gunpowder magazine areas are going to be kind of structured, you know, in this shape like your pentagon. And, they're supposed to be buildings where, shooting can go on, or they can release different types of ammunitions, and not just release them, but also store underground different types of ammunitions and keep them from going off. So, they're meant to be areas that can take, high energy impacts if needed, so it doesn't devastate a whole area. But these are also areas in the Brotherhood where, they're going to build stuff underground, and we're going to get into this area that I'm talking about in a minute, um, with um, Swynnerton. But I want to highlight, and have you see just in some of the other countries, particularly Goat Island in Sydney, you have some, but you can see where the different magazine ammunition areas are. So you have like Jack's magazine in Salt Water River, Victoria, Goat Island, Sydney, Spectacle Island, Port Jackson, North Arm Powder Magazine, Dry Creek Explosions Depot. In Canada, you have Citadel Hill, and this layout for Citadel Hill is very close to Swynnerton. Uh, Also, the Citadel in Quebec is going to be a very similar layout. So that's important to note. You have the Parc des Espeldes, you have the Coal Island, Fort Lennox. And notice in Canada, you're going to get a high amount that today I'll be going over kind of the layout there. Another high connected area for these is going to be Malta, which that's going to connect to your oversight at the Greenbrier Hotel, with them being interconnected with this area. So you've got Citadella, you also have Fort St. Anglo, and this one, these are also going to be laid out like we're talking today. You got Medina, you've got Fort Manuel, Fort St. Elmo, Fort Chambray, Chitona Lines, Fort Ricasola or Casoli. Um, you got some in the Netherlands, uh, in Delft and Den Bosch and Wijkerschans. And then also, there's note the other areas where they are also in South Africa there, East Cape, Belhurst, um, also Anglo Bior areas. Then Istanbul, which is a huge area there in Turkey. The United Kingdom, you have many there. And then, we're going to scroll down and get to, you've got a whole bunch there in Scotland. But in the United States, you've got the Camp Parapet, you've got the Powder House Square, you've got the Magazine Beach, Powder Magazine, the Charleston and South Carolina ones, which are, going to be close to some areas that are important. Jefferson Ordnance Magazine in Texas, Fort Richardson State Park in Jacksonboro, Texas, Fort Point National Historical Site in San Francisco, California. And that layout's going to be similar to what we're talking about today. Powder Magazine and the Enterprise South Industrial Park in Chattanooga. So why is all that important? Well, that's important because as we get into this, let me go to another screen here, back to our PowerPoint. As we get into this, when we start to look at the layouts of these areas, you have the Stafford area here. They're marking underground things and the shape that those underground things are in. When we see certain layouts, like we're going to point out, you know, with Swynnerton here, that is going to tell you the submarine lines are going to be in a certain formation. So as we start to describe that, I'm going to get into how the layout is like a star fort underground. Like you have the main above ground building kind of being in, the shape of that area kind of being in a rectangle, or sometimes they'll be in squares. But then in the four corners, or, like around the four corners, you're going to have four extra underground buildings that are going to extend down underground. And those are going to interconnect with different submarine lines. This is the submarine line formation that you're going to find is that, you're going to have some that are going to be like a cross here. Those ones are not as deep as the orange ones. So those cross lines, I believe are about the same depth as those buildings on the side, which are about 10 stories deep. The orange lines, which, go north, south, east, west, are going to be pretty much deeper than that. And those are going to be, main furrowways for them in and out of the areas, the orange ones. So what I'm talking about here, and we can even see in their structure, their symbol, they highlight these things in symbols that they would understand. Um, you know, we see within their badges, you get an upside down crest, that crest being marked with three dots, but also we see three prominent circles here that they're using to kind of look like ammo. We see a symbol here down at the middle, and we see two extending symbols here. This, telling us that there's underground military things there. What these symbols are pretty much telling us is that, it's a key code. So, at the front of our building here, you have three major highlighted buildings there, those representing kind of that, that lay of the land, and also representing entrance access points, um, into the deeper underground. And this is, even though it's meant to represent their armory, when they see the symbology of three, usually in some of their sovereign military symbols, you'll see the three crowns representing your Knights of the Bath or Knights of your Garter. Now, those are going to be under your Knights of Malta. And when they see this, they know that there's armory underground, and they know which layers underground. And remember, I talked about the layout. Okay, so you've got the rectangular shape there. Underground, you're going to have, you know, other buildings here at the corners that kind of, wrap around. And so they know that, in those first layers underground, those second and those third layers underground, there's going to be extra armories that they can utilize and access. And then this is telling them, about the submarine lines that they can access there. Now, I found a website which I had put in this first one, the disusedstations.org.uk features Thorpe underscore arch dash index dot shtml. And that website had these maps and a few pictures. One of them, interestingly, being enough, going back to 1942, showing a massive missile with the words to Adolf, meaning Adolf Hitler, to Adolf with from Yorkshire. So, you know, this was a facility used in those times in support of beyond Hitler and his war in support of sovereign military. I wanted you to be able to see Swynnerton. It's a pretty flat land, but everything is underground, and it's pretty much right, around Stafford here. And then you've got these main lines, sublines coming out like this. And this is one of the areas that, you know, can have access points. You also get access to underground in some of their other buildings. And these are some of their structures. You have spiritual gates, but they also have here where they would do explosions and would be able to harness the energy and direct it in a certain way. So rather than going out, it's all going to funnel either up or down. And some of their areas, you'd have a pit where energy is going to be funneled down. Now, as we get further into all of that, remember, we had got into the connection where, you have Ted Turner, Rupert Murdoch here, Dick Cheney, and Jacob Rothschilds. Rupert Murdoch and Jacob Rothschilds and Dick Cheney are all interconnected with Genie Oil and Gas. And that gets further, in the Brotherhood side. There's also going to be interconnections between these individuals and the United Nations, particularly the United Nations Foundation, upon which, Emma Rothschild sat on and was, one of the main board members for that. And I want to take a moment here before we get into some of the last slide. I want to play just a little bit of a video here with Emma Rothschild's. Give me 1 second as I set this up. And that's going, showing that money was, Ted Turner was directly connecting and sending money to the United Nations foundations for some of the different things that they were doing. And this is Emma Rothschild speaking.
Ted Turner invented a new way of seeing the news, which was also a new way of seeing the world, through his vision of cable news, starting in the United States, but very, very rapidly becoming something worldwide. And the world hasn't been the same since. His decision in 1997 to put his personal fortune towards making the United Nations a stronger institution and towards making the world a better place has inspired not just thousands, but hundreds of thousands, millions of people to think about new ways that they can get involved by giving time and giving voice and giving everything that people have to give. So in that sense, I think it really is true to say that Ted Turner changed the world first.
All right. So that's titled, Ted Turner's historic gift to the United Nations. And we see Emma Rothschild's in purple with pearls, which in the book Initiates of the Flame, it talks about those who are part of the Order of Melchizedek in the Brotherhood system, that it's common for the elite women in honor of that order to wear purple and pearls. That's one of their signature ways that they'll display that. But let me go to one more here. So as we end with this, we know that there's a lot of interconnections between the Rothschilds, Dick Cheney, Rupert Murdoch, and Jacob Rothschild and Emma Rothschild. And, what is that money going for? You have at that level, at the United Nations, the council's level in the system, you're going to have connections to the universal sovereign military. And some of the experiments, the projects, the, you know, military things that they're going to get into at the galactic level. And many of these things that have not been made known yet, sometimes there's not necessarily words to speak of these things. But when we start to learn their terms, we start to understand that, it's not just about, it's not alien technology. They're interacting between a physical and a spiritual world. They're interacting with technologies that come from, angelic technologies. And when they use the word like extraterrestrial, terrestrial is a state of matter, meaning, are you in your physical form? Are you in your spiritual form? Extraterrestrial is going to, be used to explain someone in or something in a spiritual form, meaning that, it could manifest physically, but it can also manifest spiritually. So, some of the ways to, I heard, on the video that Timothy Charles Homeseth played with the Montauk Boys, going back to the very beginning here, where they talk about the thousands upon thousands of kids buried at the backyard of Montauk. In that video, they begin to get into ships. This is not a perfect representation of what some of those look like, but it's close. If you imagined more like your submarine, like the shape, like Eye of Horus, but you have, the pointed tip all the way going to the back. Um, and then if you imagined it covered in like a skin-like material that actually looks like it's breathing, that's, what these would be, some of their extraterrestrial ships would be like. And they're considered all terrain and all atmospheres, atmospheric capabilities. So, these ships are able to go in the desert, they're able to go in water, underground, under the water. They're able to go in different atmospheres, including atmospheres that have oxygen or atmospheres that are considered non-oxygen environments, like certain areas of Mars, which are under Area 51. The material that surrounds the outside it's able to collect data through atmospheric imprints and stores that main data in its database. It replicates, or because it's able to take in so much information imprinting wise, it makes it seem like it's able to read minds. So, one of the things they would have us kids do is, put our hand on it and you'd feel it breathing. They want you to believe the ship's a living entity when you feel that. And then, because it's going to be pulling all these imprints out, they would get this data and they would make you feel like the ship was reading your mind. That's the imprint data technology. It has invisibility and camouflage technology. The smaller ships, and there's about 12 smaller ships, are comparable to submarine size in length and height, but they have much wider middles than a submarine does. Um, the docking bays are at the front and at the back. Um, and the larger size are consistent with the, area territory wise of three tri-cities, um, or let me state that, you got three cities consisting of a tri-city. So it's the size of a tri-city is what I mean to say. And comparable to military islands that I've talked about in size, which would, the ships for those military islands were called Uranus and Venus. And I've talked about how, I witnessed those as a child docked at NORAD military base in Colorado. Some of the areas of docking stations include NORAD, and this is just here in the United States, or our connections to certain military bases that have the capabilities to uh, fuel or energize these types of ships. You have NORAD, Carderock, and Carderock's is underground. It's under the water. It's considered more, um, for those that are going to be connecting to your water cities. Then you have the Ragnarok bases, which include the one off the Aleutian Islands, the Greenland base, and Antarctica. So those were some of the areas where they had fueling stations or docking bays for these type of ships that they would consider extraterrestrial ships. So I want to thank you for joining me for another special report. We'll call that extraterrestrial warfare, talking specifically about specific military bases and Ted Turner. And again, I want to refer you back to watch a video by timothycharleshomeseth.com titled Thousands Upon Thousands of Kids Buried in the Backyard at Montauk by U.S. Military, Your Taxes. So thank you again. And please join us again for special reports. You'll find those on kingdomlivingwithjessie.com under the Unveiling of the System. Thank you.